Can Russia ignore the outrage? Moscow so far has shrugged off hard evidence of summary executions in the liberated Kyiv suburb of Bucha, evidence which continues to mount. And as the West dials up sanctions and talks of arms shipments, as Ukraine's president makes his case to the UN Security Council, well, we'll gauge the mood in the room. Will blanket denials be enough to keep on board nations big and small who either by necessity or principle see it in their interest to give equal airtime to the Kremlin? On day 41 of Russia's invasion, what's Vladimir Putin's objective? To submit Ukraine or simply destroy it? With every passing day, Moscow still refuses relief to come into the besieged port city of Mariupol. What's the objective? We'll ask about the facts on the ground. Today in the France 24 debate, can Russia ignore that outrage? Joining us from Kyiv, she's the leader of the Liberal Holos Party, Ukrainian Member of Parliament, Kira Rudik. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. Good evening.
From Ukraine's second city, Kyiv, France 24, senior correspondent Catherine Norris-Trent. How are you?
I'm all right, Francois. Thanks for having me.
With us as well, sociologist Alexander Bikbov, associate fellow at Paris's School of Higher Learning in Social Studies, EHESS, as we say in French. Thank you for joining the conversation.
Thank you for the invitation.
The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation. You have on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. Before we talk about the United Nations and what the showdown that we witnessed there earlier, let's talk about what is happening on the ground. And after the weekend's grim revelations of Bucha, once the Russians had pulled out of there, not all the stories are grim. As the fighting continues in the east and northeast, there's also, with citizens in places like Kharkiv huddling every night in the metro, acts of defiance. Sometimes they include putting into practice the old adage, amor vincit omnia, love conquers all. Catherine, you filed this report.
Amidst the devastation of a bombed-out building in central Kharkiv, a ray of hope and an image of love. Newlyweds Anton and Nastia have chosen to publicize their wedding in the ruins, to draw attention to the plight of their city, pounded by Russian artillery.
Весь ужас, который происходит в городе Харьков и в Украине, все равно есть место для любви, есть место для доброты, для теплоты.
И только вот такие чувства смогут помочь всем нам победить, справиться.
The ceremony itself took place down in the subway, where thousands of inhabitants of Kharkiv have been sheltering from missiles and artillery since the first days of the war. A rare interlude of joy.
Раз и навсегда просто.
Kharkiv's mayor is a guest of honor. He's been working to keep essential services running right through the offensive.
Несмотря на такие военные действия, на агрессию, на постоянные бомбежки и то, что сегодня творит российский агрессор, российская армия с городом Харьковом и с Украиной, нашли себе волю, мужество.
We met Anton and Nastia the day before their wedding in a volunteer center distributing food and drugs. The couple are both medics, a dentist and a nurse. Like so many, they're now tirelessly working towards Ukraine's war effort.
Это приход наш, да, наверное, да? Сюда же они пишут все эти штуки.
Здесь остались очень смелые, очень храбрые люди, ну, по-моему, которых отсюда ничем не выкуришь. И они будут стоять до последнего.
До победы.
До победы.
До победы.
До самой...
Мы победим точно.
до самой победы, и они останутся здесь. Мы как-то чип, что ли, Украины.
Да, и Европы тоже.
И Европы.
Сложно сказать, наступит ли завтрашний день, в принципе.
Потому что если мы не поженимся завтра, возможно...
Послезавтра, не дай бог, может произойти
Не
что-то
случится.
ужасное, и тогда этой свадьбы просто не произойдет.
The threat of death hangs over Kharkiv, which has been pounded day and night for more than 5 weeks now. Anton and Nastia won't be taking a honeymoon anytime soon, vowing to stay on here and resist, even as the prospect of a renewed Russian offensive looms just outside their city.
So, Catherine Norris-Trent, as you say in that report, no honeymoon anytime soon.
No, that's right. I mean, life has been disrupted for everyone here in Kharkiv. Normal life, as they knew it before, has been put on hold, as it has for many people around Ukraine. So you've still got thousands of people sleeping every night underground in bomb shelters or in the metro. There are strikes here, loud explosions throughout the day and the night. And it's really striking. You know, some people are coming back out onto the streets, of course, taking risks when they do so, because you never know where the next bomb is going to land. But, you know, there are a few coffee shops opening up, a few more cars on the streets. People now, you know, more than 40 days into this conflict, are learning to live with it and try and get on as best they can. And there's a huge amount of solidarity of people volunteering, as I've seen elsewhere across Ukraine, and we've seen throughout the weeks of this conflict. Interestingly, though, you know, there is this spirit of resistance which was embodied there by the couple we met, Anton and Nastia. But they're also saying they're getting tired and they're running out of resources, and they don't know how long they can keep up this effort. So people are really hoping that this is going to end soon. But I have to say, here in Kharkiv, most people are resigned to this setting in for the long haul, and there's a great deal of fatigue and worry about what is coming their way next.
Yeah, Kira Rudik, we heard that couple in the report saying that their spirits are high, they're certain of victory. Events over the weekend with those liberated cities north of the capital, including Bucha, where we've been able to graphically now see the horror. How much has that dashed those spirits?
We do understand that in all the liberated cities we will find the similar picture. We do not have illusions that Russian soldiers in the east will be acting differently than they were acting at the outskirts of the Kyiv. And honestly, we have known this for years when we were fighting Russia on our eastern borders. We knew that they are barbarians. We knew that he is a tyrant, and we were telling the world that. So we know that there will be more horrific crimes that we will discover when we free Mariupol, when we free occupied cities that are in the east of our country. We know that. We understand that. And
what will remain in your mind when you think back to Monday we saw those images of Ukraine's president going to Bucha. What will remain in your mind from that day?
Probably the most graphic picture is after we have seen the mass grave of 300 people. We went to talk to the people who survived, and one of them showed me the house of their relatives that burned down with all inhabitants inside. So the house was down, but the fence was still standing. And there was this sign written by hand, put into a plastic file and taped very accurately on the fence. It was saying, "We are peaceful people," hoping that Russians will reconsider and will not be killing everybody inside. And it didn't happen. But they were indeed peaceful people.
What did those witnesses tell you? Did the killing take place when they came in or when they pulled out?
They said it was killing during the all stages. At the very beginning, they were looking for the resistance and for the men who will be opposing them. Then they were taking women and were raping them, and obviously men were trying to protect them. So they were killing both men and women. And then in the end, when they were retreating, they were killing people just to send a message. What they said was, you are dirt, and we are cleaning this land from the dirt. Sounds very Nazi, right? But this is what is happening. And my question is, for how long it will happen? This is a question about spirit. This is a question about what we will find in those occupied cities. It's a question of for how long would the war be going? And the answer to that is rather not only in Ukrainians' hands, but in the world's hands. And after we have seen those pictures from Bucha, after the whole world witnessed what happened there, it's up to every single world leader to reconsider what they had in mind before, to reconsider their ideas of not sending weapons to Ukraine, to reconsider the idea to buy Russian gas and oil. Because right now it's everybody's responsibility what's going on. We are showing you what they're committing on our land. And we are asking for help. And it's a shame that on day 40 of the war, we are asking for the same things that on day 1. And we are not asking for NATO troops to come here and fight for us. We are saying, give us the weaponry and we will fight for ourselves. But this does not happen too. And every single day we are saying that every dollar that is coming to Russia is being spent on Russian soldiers to kill us, to rape our women and to kill our children. So many world leaders are looking down and saying, yeah, well, there are two sides of the story. I can tell you there are none. There is no two sides of the story. You have seen the bodies. You have seen the destruction. You have seen that this cannot be happening in 21st century in the middle of Europe. It cannot.
Well, that brings us to what we saw earlier at the UN Security Council. Speaking by video link, Ukraine's president addressing the council and serving up a stark wake-up call.
You can do two things. Either remove Russia as an aggressor and a source of war, so it cannot block decisions about its own aggression, its own war, or if there's no alternative, then the other option is for the Security Council to dissolve itself altogether.
Well, joining our panel is Yves Dutriot, professor of geopolitics at Paris-Dauphine University. A diplomat in a previous life, your postings included France's mission to the United Nations. Thanks for joining us here in the France 24 debate. That speech, Volodymyr Zelensky at several times, telling the United Nations, look, you either have to reform this institution in some way or cease to exist because Russia's just going to keep vetoing. Your reaction to Zelensky's speech this Tuesday?
The idea of reforming the Security Council is not a new one. We, France, and some others, were in favor of an expansion of the number of the Security Council members. And regarding the veto issue, because Zelensky obviously is referring to the Russian veto, we said nearly 10 years ago that permanent Security Council member should refrain from using the veto when there is a humanitarian catastrophe. And it's clearly a humanitarian catastrophe that the Russians, ironically, are provoking. So they should not use a veto in that case. But we have the support of nearly 120 countries, member states of the UN. But it's not enough, because to change the UN Charter, you need the consent of the 5 permanent members. But what we ask for, refrain from the veto, didn't mean a change of the charter, but just a political commitment by the P5, permanent 5. And members. Even that, neither the Russians nor the Chinese, and even not the US, would agree upon. We have to come back to the origin of the veto. It's an invention of President Roosevelt during the Second World War, where, considering the UN Charter, he said the League of the Nations, before World War II, has been inefficient. We need to have a strong, limited number of countries who are able to work by consensus in order to fight against any war and to set up peace. But 2 years after the setting of the UN, began the Cold War. So that was the end of the consensus that Roosevelt was trying to set up with Stalin at that time.
I want to turn to you, Alexander Bykbov, now and get your reaction to what we heard there from Kira Rudik, who'd been to Bucha the day before. And the way they described this effort to dehumanize Ukrainians on the part of the Russian soldiers that were there. As someone who studies civil society in Russia, what's your reaction to that?
I would say that this is an implementation of the propaganda scheme which was elaborated by the governmental agencies already in 2010, 2011. And which is spread over several types of events, including street rallies, including war events, including civil society activities. And just to make a step aside from this tragedy and to illustrate the idea, I would like to give an example of the reactions by the police during the street rallies, the civil protest in Russia in 2011-2012. I was interviewing several policemen informally because it was not possible to register the interviews. And I discovered to my surprise that in whole activities of protest manifestants of civil society, which was out in the streets, the policemen didn't believe they were manifestations. For the policeman who was keeping the order at that moment, just in front of the civil protestants, the rallies didn't exist. So the question is, what exists if it was not a rally? The policemen were instructed by the officials, by the superiors, that they were paid activities.
Activists.
Yes, actors, or maybe a more complex scheme. In any way, it was a paid activity which was provoked by the
CIA, perhaps.
Oh, by the Western societies in general, and everything which was happening didn't relate to the core of the claims the people were bringing in the street. So I would say that we observe today in the Kremlin propaganda the same model, which is reproduced, just simply reversed to the other reality. The war doesn't exist. It is not the war. So the consequences is that the atrocities of the war couldn't be controlled by the Kremlin just because of the denial, of the complete denial of the events.
Moscow,
Maidan was made by the West and or neo-Nazi.
For certain.
Maidan revolution.
It's Moscow, which continues to call it a special military operation. To George Orwell's line, black is white, white is black. The Russian Foreign Ministry insisting Bucha was a false flag operation, that there is no evidence of Russians killing civilians. A line defended this Tuesday at the Security Council.
I simply would like to take advantage of the virtual presence here of the President of Ukraine to address him directly. We place on your conscience the ungrounded accusations against the Russian military, which are not confirmed by any eyewitnesses.
However, images taken from space say otherwise. Colorado-based satellite company Maxar Technologies showing stills from March the 19th. They include close-ups in the streets of Bucha of what appear to be bodies. This is on Yablonska Street. Russian forces didn't pull out of Bucha until around March the 30th. And those satellite images, which the New York Times, Kira Rudik, was able to couple with pictures from street level, clearly prove that those bodies had been in the street quite a while. And yet, Russia's line remains the same at the Security Council. How do you counter that?
So, look, we know that Russia would do something like that, This is why when we went to Bucha, we made sure that we take all the international journalists from the most respectable medias, from the most respectable channels will go there with us. We have been at war with Russia for 8 years. We know their tips and tricks, and we know like the book that they are going. By the way, that is the same book that Hitler was using. So it's not news to us how they would act. They would never admit to anything. They would always say that it is not us. And you know why they can do it? Because the whole Western world for 8 years was allowing them to. For 8 years, they were saying, it is not us fighting Ukraine on the east. It's not our army. There were definite proofs of having their regular army and military there. And they were saying, it is not us. And they were still continuing being on the UN Security Council, being in all the international organizations, and everybody was closing their eyes on them. So they will continue doing it their way. And we know that. And this is why we are trying to open everybody's eyes on that. They took over Crimea with the so-called referendum. And it was obvious for everybody, but there was no action taken. Absolutely no action. And so for these 8 years, he was given all the mercy and all the forgiveness of the world. Everybody was shaking his hand. Everybody was dealing with Russia. Everybody was buying their gas and oil. And right now, he was able to collect enough money to afford the war. And he is affording it, and he is moving forward with his propaganda, with his Hitler's propaganda list on the book, with what he is doing right now. So what we need to have, and I want to add to the story about the United Nations. My question to United Nations is, nations united with whom? So everybody are talking about the processes, the rules that they have. Putin is laughing at the rules. The tyrants are laughing at the rules. And the Western world is still trying to stick to the illusion that the life could be as it was before. It cannot. Life has changed, and it will be changing faster and faster. And if we will be sticking to how it was before, we will just be losing to the tyrants like Putin, to the tyrants like others that exist.
All right, let me bring in Yves Dutrieu on this and get your reaction.
No, the question is, I want to finish.
Go ahead.
So the question is, the nations are united with whom? Are the nations in the United Nations are ready to shake Putin's hand? Are they ready to continue doing that? Because right now, this choice is very simple. If they continue doing that, then they will be shaking the hands that are like this in Ukrainians' blood. Or nations will need to do something that is against the rules. They will need to throw Russia all the United Nations, saying we do not want to be united with you. Yes, there are probably no rules to that. Yes, this is probably a very tough decision, but this is something that is a tipping point that is happening right now, right away.
Yves Dutrieu, two quick questions. First of all, has the days of plausible deniability on the part of Moscow, is that over? Is this a tipping point? Is it, or here in Europe, I mean, or is
yes, it's clear.
It's clear.
It's clear, and international justice, Ukrainian judge are going to investigate. NGO, the French prosecutor has decided to open 3 inquiries in connection with the French national murder in Ukraine. So they will dispatch forensic. They will get witnesses.
We saw this Tuesday the first Darfur genocide trial open 19 years after the facts. So
now it's immediately after the facts. Right. So that's a big change.
Let me ask.
The public opinion is upset by that. Politicians as well. So action will come in support of the Ukrainian justice. We can go to the International Criminal Court as well. But if Ukrainian judges are able to deal with the matter, we will support them.
Now, Kira Rudik's point that it can no longer be business as usual. Emmanuel Macron has spoken 9 times on the telephone with Vladimir Putin since the start of the war as rotating president of the European Council, keeping the channels of communication open as the sanctions get stiffer and stiffer. There's a new round that's planned this week. Is Macron right to speak to Putin?
I think it was mainly on behalf of Zelensky, because he spoke with the president of Ukraine. For instance, last week he tried to speak with Putin about humanitarian corridor out of Mariupol upon request of Zelensky. So we need to speak in order to promote peace. That was another try of Macron to support the beginning of peace talks between Ukrainian delegation and the Russian delegation, with the support of the West, obviously. So there was a kind of division of labor between Biden and the leaders of the European Union. Biden refused to speak, but he let the Europeans speak with Putin in order at least to try. That's a work of diplomacy. And
the art of the possible.
Exactly. We try, and we will continue to try.
All right, let's talk about the situation on the ground, because we're entering a new phase for sure. After the miscalculations of Russia's initial onslaught, NATO confirming that Moscow is now concentrating its efforts on the Donbass. Its Secretary General spoke earlier in Brussels.
We now see a significant movement of troops away from Kyiv to regroup, rearm, and resupply. In the coming weeks, we expect a further Russian push in the eastern and southern Ukraine to try to take the entire Donbass and to create a land bridge to occupied Crimea.
So, Catherine Norris-Trent, I feel like first question to ask you is, what's the latest where you are in Kharkiv?
People here are worried that, we're right up in the northeast of Ukraine, just around 40 kilometres from the Russian border, and there's a big battle raging out of town towards the southeast, towards the town of Izum, which is on the road to Donetsk and the Donbass. People here are worried, very worried, that they are also going to be coming into the line of fire again. I mean, they've not stopped being under the line of fire. I've just been hearing some, what sounds like incoming artillery fire in the distance while I've been waiting and listening to our guests. People are worried that they could be next again, that they could be in for a re-intensified push. They're worried that Vladimir Putin could still have a desire to try and take Kharkiv, although for the moment the Ukrainian forces have pushed the troops further out from the city. They've managed to stop them advancing in. But people don't feel they're out of the woods. Several people say to me spontaneously when we speak to them on the streets that they're worried their city could become another Mariupol. They're, of course, clearly watching what is going on. And here, as we get towards, the east of Ukraine, they don't feel that things are moving at all in the right direction for them. And if anything, they're becoming increasingly worried here.
Increasingly worried. Kira Riddick, you made that appeal earlier for weapons to fight the war. What is it that's needed for Ukraine?
First of all, we need heavy weaponry. This is what we have been asking since day one. We need a wide range weapons that we can use to fight Russians in the sky. We need fighter jets. We need S-300s. We need additional tanks. We cannot fight Russians just only with Kalashnikov and a couple of Stingers. And this list is clear. It's not hidden somewhere. It's public, and it's been published by our Ministry of Defense. This is discussed on each and every parliamentary discussion that we are having. This is what we are talking to the world leaders every single day. You remember how we were asking for a no-fly zone, where right now we are unwrapping what this means. We are fighting very well on the ground. You see that. We are giving them hell. We are using all our means to fight them and push them back. But in the air, we do not have the support, we do not have supplies, we do not have the tools. And this is what we are asking for. Give us the ability to close the sky for ourselves. Give us the ability to protect our cities so they would not be bombarded. Like in Kharkiv, if we can protect the skies, then it would be a peaceful city because they cannot get to it on the ground. When we are talking about Mariupol, if we can protect it from the skies, then we will be able to actually liberate it. If we are talking about Kyiv, we threw them on the land, but we are still in fear here because you can be very brave with your Kalashnikov and you can fight very hard, but you can do nothing. absolutely nothing with the missile that is coming from the air onto your home. And this is what, and this is what we need the help with. We say we will be, while the pilots will be in those planes, our people will be using those weapons. Just give us the weapons.
Yves
Sell it to
Dutrieu,
them.
let me bring you in on this. The German foreign minister this Tuesday giving the strongest signal yet that Germany is ready and willing to send more of heavier types of weaponry. It's something that Germany's been very reluctant to do in the past. I know that it's sometimes a difficult subject to broach because, well, NATO wants to play its cards close to its chest. Put the question to you this way then, is NATO doing all that it can at this point?
There is a meeting of NATO, I think, in coming days. We have already decided to dispatch military weapons, lethal defense military weapons to each member state of NATO, including France, even though on the French side we have been very discreet in order not to disseminate the information. But the ministers were very clear that military weapons are transferred to Ukraine. You have seen that NATO has reinforced its eastern flank, from Baltic states to Poland to Romania. The Secretary General of NATO referred to support to cyber war, support to Ukraine in order to counteract cyber war from Russia. So I think NATO is doing its best to support, but there is a kind of red line, if I may say so. And a member of the Rada referred to the no-fly zone and to the sending of plane. And here, perhaps it has been regarded by NATO as a red line.
Hesitant to do that, but how about tanks?
Because
how about tanks?
Yes, I've seen that there are some hints that tanks could be provided to Soviet-made tanks could be provided to Ukraine. I've seen an information from Washington, by the way. But the red line is that we don't wish to be co-belligerents. And we know that Russia is a nuclear power. So this is very serious.
This first phase of the war, Alexander Bikbov, there's a lot of casualties on both sides. We've been reporting here on how that's been reported back in Russia so far, downplaying, of course, the Russian casualties. Can Russia keep going? And will people in Russia support the war no matter what? I'm talking, of course, outside of the big cities like Russia, like Moscow and St. Petersburg.
For the moment, it is going on, and it has potential to continue. And it depends very much on the propaganda model, once again. And following the classic study by Paul Lazarsfeld, who studied how the propaganda works still in the 30s, there are three main instruments. This is the monopolization, the canalization, and the subsistence of the propaganda message. So the monopolization means cutting off all the oppositional voices. It's done, and it was the quite systematic work which was done in Russia in the previous year, when all the associations, non-governmental organizations and oppositional media were tied down. Then canalization, this is not still the point which is touched. And this gives much hope because there is now an aesthetical mobilization of the type of the states in the 30s or 40s, like in Nazi state or in Stalin state. There is now an abandon of the current order of capitalism, of what the elites are acquainted to. And this is something which gives a hope that the fascist type of mobilization couldn't happen.
And of course, the difference with the 1930s is everyone's got a cell phone. And even if they do subscribe to what's on Russian media outlets, and even if there are firewalls, does some of what the outside world is saying seep in?
Sure. There is a circulation of information, and those who wish to be informed are informed in Russia still. there are many means of going outside this new Chinese wall of information. And what is happening now, it's a constellation, a constitution of more polarized viewpoints. And what is happening is this third instrument of reinforcement of the propaganda message. We observe now how it percolates through the family communications. So now it's discussed in the family dinners. And this is something which is really important from the point of view of how the propaganda works.
And Alexander, have you been privy to some of those intercepted telephone conversations between Russian soldiers and their family?
This is also, it makes part of the information which doesn't reach official media for sure. And still there is an information about that. Once again, those who wish to be informed are informed.
Catherine Norris-Trent, Ukraine, a former Soviet state, and you really feel it where you are in Kyiv. It's a Russian-speaking city for the most part, and you've spoken to people who feel heartbroken about what's going on.
Absolutely. There's a lot of that in Kyiv. We spoke with one old lady who grew up in Soviet Russia. Her father, she told us, was a defender of Stalingrad and feels not only very shocked and very scared, but also very hurt by what is going on now. And she said that she never believed that Putin would be capable of doing this, in her words, of turning Kyiv into a new Stalingrad. And that has been echoed by other people we've spoken to, people here who describe themselves as ethnic Russians who are shocked and furious, of course, about the bombs raining down on their city. So this, may be a majority Russian-speaking city, but the shelling, the attacks on this city for 5 weeks now have rallied people, galvanized them to the Ukrainian cause more than before, I would say. So it's a very complex situation. As I said, we're not far from the Russian border here, but there is fury here among people who have friends, family, cultural ties on the other side of this border, and a lot of incomprehension. Just before the 24th of February, people in this city and other parts of eastern Ukraine, I was down in Mariupol at the time, were telling us they simply didn't believe the intelligence reports that this invasion, this war was going to happen. So there's been a huge amount of shock, and people are devastated.
Did you believe it, Kira on February 24th?
We obviously knew that Russia will at some point attack. We did know that they're gathering their forces. The problem was that it's always a challenge to believe something that you really hope that wouldn't happen. And this is why it was such a shock for the whole world. However, as a member of parliament, I can tell you we were getting ready to different scenarios, and we were preparing to making sure that we will be able to support our army. We were building it up. However, when we are looking forward to how to build our country in future, I cannot see us rebuilding it, having Russia as a neighbor, having a country that wants us to be destroyed, that wants us gone and expelled as a neighbor. It's just impossible.
Just impossible.
So
Alexander Bykov, there was this column in RIA Novosti, a Russian outlet, which talked about de-Ukrainification. Now, it's just one column, but is there that mindset in Russia today?
Well, this mindset goes back to 2014, and it was the work made by some clearly, how to say it, minority, extreme right-wing essayists and journalists who were admitted to the major media, to the mainstream media.
They were in the fringe then.
Yes. And the use of their contribution was pretty tricky at that moment in order to advance some more radical positions and then to deny them in favor of so-called well-balanced conservatism. What is happening now is the the advancement of this mindset to more mainstream propaganda.
And that brings us, well, we got to say it, we're 5 days away from a French presidential election, and the far right is expected to do very well. There's even some polls that suggest that in a runoff, the incumbent Emmanuel Macron is within the margin of error with his lead over the far right's Marine Le Pen, the same Le Pen who got 2 loans from Russian banks to help bankroll her presidential run in 2017. She's condemning the Kremlin over its invasion of Ukraine. Still, she's against severing ties. Le Pen claims to be on the same page as her potential rival in the second round.
I always try to have a position that is as reasonable as possible, but above all, a position that takes into consideration France's interests. And in this, I'm not alone. I remind you that 2/3 of the world is thinking today about its national interests in relation to Russia. This is the case of India, it's the case of China, Africa, Israel, Turkey, and a whole host of other countries.
Yves Dutriot, did you, Alexander Bigbov's term of these fringe far-right ideologues becoming well-balanced conservatism, is that what we just heard there from Marine Le Pen?
We know that they tried to have a good relationship with Putin in the past. I have to tell you that now it's no longer possible to get financing from foreign non-European states for political parties. So I'm not sure that this event could have an effect on the outcome of the French election. It's true that the extreme right in France and even the extreme left, in one way, they had, at least in the past, some understanding about Russia, the fact that we, the West, we have humiliated Russia with the expansion of NATO and so on. Some of them consider that France should withdraw from NATO. So this...
And is it the same as what Alexander describing? These ideas that were at the fringe are now becoming more mainstream in France as we look ahead to this presidential race?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. The problem is that at the second round, we will have, I suspect, I don't know, Macron and Le Pen, and then you could have people voting for Le Pen because they are against Macron. Doesn't mean that they are extreme right. That's, we will have to assess very carefully the outcome of the second round, and the percentage that Mrs. Le Pen could get, you can be sure that part of them would vote for Le Pen because they are against Macron. Doesn't mean that they are pro-Le Pen. So it's, French politics complicated.
Kira Rudik, we're out of time, but let me just ask you before we go, your look at your prism being so close to the front line where you are is, of course, different from where we're sitting here in an air-conditioned studio in Paris. What would you tell our viewers to look at in the days to come?
After we showed the pictures of what's happening in Ukraine, it's not anymore what people can deny or close their eyes on. Every single politician, every single person, every single decision maker is either making its choice to help Ukraine and stop the atrocities, or it's making a choice to do nothing, which is basically allowing Russia to continue killing people, to continue creating horror, and to continue moving forward through the Europe. And it's on every single person to push their politicians to do the right thing. We are so grateful for all the support that we are getting from people all over the world, for humanitarian aid, for taking our refugees. And we need this final push to make Russia new North Korea, with no people shaking their hands, no dollars flowing to them, and no support given to them. They need to be pariahs as they are, so they can eat themselves inside the country, collapse, destroy themselves, and then just leave the world alone.
All right, those will be the final words for now. Kira Rudik, I want to thank you for joining us from Kyiv. Catherine Norris-Trent, your reporting from Kharkiv is on our website, france24.com. Thanks for joining us as well. I want to thank as well Alexander Bigbov and Yves Dutriot. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.